it's a very beautiful idea that God is our Father in a very close family relationship concept. Well, let's talk now with Dwarf.
Hi.
Hi.
Which God? I'm really curious. Which of the Jewish gods or which of the Christian gods are you guys talking about? Plus, I've never heard the word deification. What's that mean?
Deification?
Yes.
Deification, yes, it does refer to when people are exalted to godhood.
How do you do that? Does that mean women and men, or what?
Oh, sure. I mean, you have to realize that the early church fathers who discussed this concept...
Which early church fathers? LDS?
No, we're talking about early Christian church fathers.
Okay.
The church fathers in the Christian faith who lived in the first couple of centuries after Christ and the apostles.
Okay.
Very firmly talked about this concept, and that they always said men can become like gods. They were using the term men in a generic sense. Maybe we should translate that as people. People can become like gods.
Okay, I have been, I think you gave really a pretty good introduction to what I have been up to here recently. I've been looking at the concept of deification, and I use that term. I'm going to use that frequently as we're talking tonight. It's a term that probably is not used. I haven't heard it used much in LDS circles, and I certainly have not heard it used much in non-LDS Christian circles. But it's a term which I think is fairly transparent in that it has the root word from which deity comes from, and it has reference to the idea of men being gods, becoming like God, or becoming gods in a future state. And this topic has been a topic of considerable interest in Mormonism since its first introduction into LDS thinking, which I see as somewhere around the time of the first couple of years of the organization of the LDS Church, around in 1832, in that time frame. This idea, the idea of deification in Mormonism has some very deep roots, I believe. The concept runs through many different ideas that Latter-day Saints hold quite near and dear, and I think basically has reference to the idea that man is going through a state of progression, a state in his progression here on earth that has gone on many other times and in many other places, and which will be going on in future worlds and future systems throughout all time. And along with this idea, I think something that perhaps capsulizes Mormon thinking in this area is the idea that man and God are of the same species, to put it one way, and that God is doing something now which man will be doing sometime in the future if he comes up to that level of purification and advancement, and also that man is doing something now, that what we're going through now is something which God himself has experienced in some time past. That idea has, of course, been quite offensive to many non-LDS Christians of the Western Christian perspective, and at least in our times, that idea is extremely foreign to ideas that are held by those who are of the larger Catholic and Protestant traditions. But what is interesting about this whole idea to me is that if we go back to early Christian times, we find that an idea very similar, or ideas, I should say, ideas very similar to the LDS point of view in many respects, was very widely held by many of the early Christian fathers who are looked upon today by current Catholic and Protestants as being the church fathers These were not heretics. These were not people who held views that were out of harmony with orthodoxy as Christians today look back on them. I'm talking about men like Augustine and Tertullian and Origen. And I have a list that includes almost all of the early church writers, of whom we have their writings that have been preserved. As we look at these writings, virtually all of the early Christian writers of the first several centuries held to an idea that man will appropriately be referred to, those who attain to exaltation will appropriately be referred to as gods, and will in fact be deified and become divine in a future state. And so there are, of course, a number of very interesting questions that come to play in all of this. If early Christians held this idea, what happened to it? And where did Joseph Smith get this idea from? Does it have some relationship in Mormonism? Does it jump back over 1,000 years of Christian history back to early Christianity? Does it have some tie-in there? And there are a number of related questions which I think I see as being very interesting. There are also, I would just mention that there are a number of differences between the way Mormons see this concept today and the concept that early Christians held on the subject. Well, as we go back historically in LDS thought, I think it's very difficult when you start trying to determine where an idea specifically began, to put your finger exactly on an idea. And before I go any further with this, I want to bring in one thought too, and that is that I have run into this in almost all of the conversations and discussions that I have had with religious people of various different perspectives in the last 20 years, and that is what seems to me to be quite a stumbling block that gets in the way of people's ability to look at ideas and religion in an objective manner. And this problem that I see is that so many people that I have talked with have this assumption. They assume that something like this, that what I currently believe is what all true believers have always believed. And I think that this creates a lot of problems for people as they approach religion, because historically, I don't think it's possible to defend any position that says that any religious tradition has gone on for very long unchanged. You go back historically, and that's what historians find as they do historical research, as they study the writings of different leaders, and it seems to me that every generation that you look at has a different religion than the generation that went before in some respect. The Catholics today have a different brand of Catholicism than the Catholics of the previous generation. The same is true with Baptists and Mormons and Jews and so on and so forth. Everything seems to have some kind of effect upon upon current religious beliefs. As something new comes into a society, the religion of that society has to react to it in some way, and so the religion, as I see it, ends up changing and progressing in some fashion or another.
Do you believe that these are fundamental changes, or mostly superficial ones based on society, or